Welcome to this week's session with the Putnam County District Library and the Guiding Ohio Online Grant. This week we're going to take a look at just two different Excel tips that I hope that you can find useful and helpful when you are using Excel. Many people use Excel when they're doing things with addresses and information data-wise that they're entering in. And sometimes those lists can get kind of long and extensive. So I'm going to show you a couple helpful tools that can be used when you're doing that. So the first thing is I'm going to pull this Excel sheet over, and I have some data that I've already entered. And you'll notice with this data that I have entered, it's a little bit messy and sloppy. It's cutting off the columns, the information exceeds and goes beyond what the width of the different columns are. And so you can't read everything. And a lot of times what I'll see people do is when you take a mouse, and notice how I take this now and I move it up and it changes over. The crosshairs turn over and I now have an arrow on each side of that crosshair. So I can click here and I can extend this column out. Now I could do that and do that for each and every column all across the board. That can get kind of extensive, especially if you go, out and you would have something clear out here to column Z. I mean, I'd have to click 26 different times, obviously, to make the column the correct width. So what you can do instead is, if you notice, between the 1 and the A, I have what looks like this box that has kind of like a triangle in it. If I click on that automatically selects my whole Excel sheet. And when I select my whole Excel sheet, I can then go back over here to any one of these columns. It doesn't really matter which one I choose, but I just pick one while I have everything selected, and I'm going to double click with my crosshairs. And notice when I do that, now all of a sudden everything that I have has become the width that is the longest information that is entered into the box. So that is how you could quickly select all as well as make a change to the width of your columns. So that is the first tip today. And the second tip has to do with many of us have information that we have entered into an Excel sheet. And a lot of times we want to do things with an address and maybe do mailings or such. And when you're doing a mailing, and especially if you want to do something like a mail merge, you need that information in separate columns to do that. And notice here what I have in this first example is I have a full address. Now what I had done then, so say this was my information that I had to start with. What I did was I took that and broke that out. So I put a street number, street name, city, state, and zip code, which is the information I have here. So what I want to do is I want to provide Excel with an example of what I'd like to see. So I'm going to put in, just do the very first column as an example. So, or I should say the very first row, going across our rows. So I'm going to put White Road, and then I'm going to put my city as Decatur. I'm going to put my state as Georgia, the abbreviation, and then I'm going to put my zip code. So I now have the example in the format that I'd like to see. So I'm going to go to the first one for my street number. I'm going to click on the 1-1, so I highlight that, and then I am going to simply do Control E. And notice what happens. It automatically fills in, and it takes that data, and it's like, okay, here's the example you provided me. Here's what you want me to do with that data. I'll do the same thing here for White Road. Click, Control E. I get the same information. Decatur, which is my city. Same information, state, Control E, same information, and then zip code, and Control E, same information. Now, the one thing is you would maybe have to double check a little bit. You will notice it didn't quite know for sure what to do with this city that I happened to have that was spelled out with 3 different kind of like names. So I would have to correct that information. But otherwise, it has filled in my information. The other thing is notice I did lose my leading 0. That is normal with a number, that you will often lose that number if it starts with a 0. So I would have to fix those. But it's a much quicker way, especially if I would have a list that was, a couple hundred, 200 long. It would be a much quicker way than retyping all of that information in. The same thing can be done with names. So I've got an example here with this Kelly Scott name. So if I take this, first of all, I'm going to notice I've got a typo up here. I don't have first spelled correctly. So I've got first name there. So I'm going to put in Kelly here. I'm going to do the same thing with Scott as the last name, and now I've got the information I want. Same thing. Click where the first name is located, do my Control E, it's going to fill it in, same thing, Control E, and it's going to fill that in where the last name was. So now I quickly was able to take my names that I have all in one column and separate those out. And then the last thing is if you are with, especially with maybe a company or an organization where you would have address or an email address that you maybe have a system that you use with that email address and it's consistently the same. So for example, if you're with a company where the first name dot last name at is the normal standard, you could quickly do this by, if I would type in Kelly dot Scott, and then I were to go at, and I'm just going to call this company.org. Notice now I've got my email address in. Notice I do have a hyperlink. If I click on this, it's going to want to go to my hyperlink and open that up. I can turn off hyperlink by simply doing a right click here, and I can go down here to edit hyperlink, and I can actually remove that hyperlink. So it's no longer the blue, because a hyperlink is going to want to take me either to an address, an email address like that, or it's going to want to take me out on the web to a web address. So I've got my kelly.scott@company.org. Same thing. If I click on this, do a Control E, now all of a sudden I have the same exact format. Again, the only time that isn't going to work for you is, say, for example, the name Scott Miller might be a common name. If you had to maybe slightly change that formatting, of course, then that would not be correct. So those are the 2 different tips you can use and can be helpful. One is saving and changing the length and the width of columns. And then the second one is how you can autofill and change information in an actual Excel sheet that you might already have some data documented in. So I hope you can find this information helpful and that everyone has a great week.